that we're getting into pretty close to spring football season, it kind of makes you wonder, what is the state of spring college football now? I mean, now that we're kind of getting the conversation going, and ESPN did a really good piece on this, kind of discussing how various Power Four programs are kind of handling spring games, what are some alternatives, and also the history of it. I think for those of you who are just as passionate about college football as I am, that's something I highly recommend looking up, is reading that article, and I can definitely put a link to it in the description. But we look at spring games now, and approximately 19 programs have canceled their spring games altogether this year. One of the biggest proponents of this is Matt Rule, head coach at Nebraska, coming into his third year, and he was pretty animated about spring football, and he went on the Pat McAfee show, and of course, we're all paraphrasing here in terms of what his exact quote was, but in essence, it was, "Hey, we're not going to sit here and let the Michigans of the world and Ohio States and teams with more money come in, watch our game plan, see what we're going to do, and then poach some of our depth players." Because especially now in the day and age of the transfer portal, having those younger players being able to really truly grow and develop, it's a lost art form. Because now, coaches are sitting there saying, okay, not only do I have to worry about what happens immediately after the season, right after a bowl game ends, but also I have to sit there and hope to myself, man, after this kid finishes the spring semester, is he even going to be here during the summer? So now you have two double whammies that you have to sit here and worry about too. I mean, I've said it time and time again. If it were up to me, I would just be eliminating the spring transfer portal altogether and just making it one time only. And having some accountability in terms of actually having to make a commitment somewhere. Obviously, we can talk about the same thing in terms of head coaches, for example. I mean, we just saw Scott Loeffler of Bowling Green dip to be the Philadelphia Eagles quarterback coach, but luckily they got Eddie George, and I would probably argue that's a really strong hire for them. So I think it's going to work out just fine for them, especially Bowling Green has constantly been a program, particularly within the past couple of years of them being on the up and up and moving in the right direction. But, we think about spring football, and there are pros and cons to both. I would argue that the cons to it, obviously, I briefly elaborated with Matt Rule. It's the idea that, hey, guys can easily be poached. Players and teams can kind of see what you're doing. You're running the risk of having injuries, and you're kind of just running the risk of really just, is the juice worth the squeeze? And that's essentially what I think these conversations really come down to. And I was really fascinated by Deion Sanders' quote about spring football, and he possibly proposed about having a second team come in and essentially be a preseason game where you can possibly sell some tickets and really kind of get the hype out there. But the big question really kind of comes down to is, okay, let's say you have this in sometime in April or May. I mean, first things first, the majority of the kids either aren't going to be on campus or they're right going to be in finals week. So I think you kind of eliminate that from a logistical perspective. But most importantly, you sit there and say, let's just hypothetically say it's Colorado. I mean, who are they going to bring in to scrimmage them? They're going to bring in Northern Colorado or something, some FCS team. They score a couple touchdowns. They maybe do a couple touchdowns in the end zone, and that's really it. So it kind of makes you wonder, like, does there really need to be another team to help facilitate the hype towards spring football anyway? And I don't really think that's necessary, because some of the fundamental reasons for why we have spring games to begin with are still true today. I mean, Brett Bielema at Illinois, he's been a college football head coach for 17 seasons now. He's always insisted on having a spring game. And his argument was essentially, hey, it brings out the competition. It gets some of that rust out for, some of these players who could be on the younger side, who, could be, they sat there and perhaps just partied and had a good time from January until the beginning of March. So you don't really kind of know exactly what you're going to get in that regard. And you can even look at it from Washington head coach Jed Fish's perspective of, hey, if players are ready to ball, we're ready to ball. And when you're trying to build a program like Washington, who's kind of been on, they're moving in the right direction, but they have a very loyal fan base there. And most importantly, it's just fun to be a part of. It's especially from a fan perspective, it's fun to sit there and watch your local team be out there and be able to market the program and be able to sell season tickets and being able to see some of the interviews from some of the players about, hey, we got this game circled on our calendar. Oh, we got this game circled on our calendar. And it's just fun to get the conversation going because, yes, are we still about 4 or 5 months out from the season? Absolutely. But the difference is with college football that it's much more of a regional game. And what I mean by a regional game is, when I lived up in the Northeast, everything was about the Philadelphia Eagles, New York Yankees, and some of the more prominent teams. Whereas, you go down south to Alabama, Florida, where I'm at, or any of those kind of areas, they live, breathe, and die college football down here. So I think the argument also is spring games matter to the degree of how regional the team is and how important it is to that college football landscape and culture. Because yes, you can sit there and say, oh, well, why are we gonna risk all this stuff just for the fans too? But at the same time too, I mean, you also throw out there the whole tampering thing, and I've had this conversation on this show numerous times, and the reality is that there's no such thing as tampering anymore. It's pretty much glorified free agency. I mean, I would look at it. I compare the college football model now to me, it's pretty much like the Premier League in the sense that what you can spend, you can pretty much spend as much as you want. The only thing you can't really do is you just kind of have to indirectly pay the players. So it's a little bit different in that regard, but there's nothing stopping Clemson, for example, having a $10 million NIL budget compared to Wake Forest, you might only have a $5 million budget. So it's just those kind of trade-offs that you have. But even, as we look more forward into the season too, I think we're going to see more of that disparity too in terms of the actual talents on the teams. And we're also going to be seeing this in terms of how certain programs handle spring football in general, because, the Alabamas of the world, the Georgias of the world, the Michigans of the world, they don't really have to have a spring training game necessarily. Even Nebraska, for example, their history and their prestige and the overall ambiance of just the program in general, it's going to sell itself. Whereas some of these smaller programs, yeah, you're going to have to sprinkle in some excitement, some enthusiasm, some marketability towards it to really get people talking now too. Because now that we see a lot of the schedules coming out, it definitely makes it that much more exciting too. But I'd love to get everybody's take on spring football. I personally love it as a fan. It's just fun just to see, some pigskin being thrown in the air, seeing some interviews, and just people being excited about the game. And to me, that's what it's really all about: bringing fans together, having some fun while you're at it, and most importantly, just supporting the athletes and the coaches and all the schools. So let me know what you think. But